I guess I'm not trying to evade the question. The first thing I would say is, as I've already said, disproportionality as a term, a legal term, it has no meaning at all. What disproportionality technically means is, let's say this person here is targeted, and then in order to, quote unquote, take him out, you use a 1-ton bomb, and in the course of taking him out, you take out 30 other people, civilians, innocents. So the claim is that the value of the target was much less than the loss in civilian life, and therefore it was a disproportional attack. Well, then Israel comes back and says, but you made a mistake there, because he was a terrorist commander, and therefore his value is higher. And so it's not just 1 for 1 or even 2 civilians for 1. Because he's a terrorist commander, it becomes 10 civilians is proportional because he's a terrorist commander. And then Israel says, and we had information that he was about to commit a terrible terrorist atrocity. So then we have to factor in terrorist commander about to commit a massive terrorist atrocity. And then somebody comes back and says, but no, we have information he wasn't going to. But then Israel says, under the law, you can only judge disproportionality or proportionality by the knowledge of the commander at the moment he launched the attack. So even if he wasn't about to commit a terrorist attack, the commander thought he was. Well, once you go through all these permutations and combinations, you can't prove proportionality. And so it's an utterly worthless, meaningless term, which is why human rights organizations always use it. Because you can't pin any legal culpability with that allegation. However, as I said, I'm not trying to evade your question. The point, however, is when you use the term proportionality, you use the term indiscriminate attack, they presuppose that there was a military object or a combatant. It's indiscriminate because you were targeting a combatant, but you targeted him in an imprecise or indiscriminate way. But the fact of the matter was, there were no military targets. They weren't targeting military people. That was the whole point of Goldstone's conclusion. What was the purpose of cast lead? To punish, humiliate, and terrorize a civilian population. All the terminology of war, disproportionate attacks, indiscriminate attacks, all that terminology, the moment you start using it, just like the moment you start using that term border fence, the moment you use terms like that, you have become wittingly or unwittingly, consciously or unconsciously, you've become an instrument of Israeli propaganda. These are not war crimes. These are crimes against humanity. There were no war. There was no war. There were no rockets. Now when you hear the discussion, what's going on the border, they talk about Israel's disproportionate response. Number one, Israel has no right to any response. None. You don't have a right. You don't have a right to imprison children in an area that's unlivable and in which they're daily being poisoned. You have no right. You have no right to use disproportionate force. You have no right to use indiscriminate force. You don't have any right to target. You don't have any right to use any force. You have only one obligation, and that's to open the gates of that prison, to open the gates of that concentration camp, because that's what it is. If you want to get in the position of defending Israel's right to poison children, you've lost me. I can't even conceive that language. Disproportionate force. Let's leave aside the question of whether they have the right to use any force. Disproportionate force. I read the statistic today from the UN. Now, I haven't confirmed it, but the statistic I read was 5,100 Gazans have been injured. Many of those injuries because Israel is using these very lethal ammunition that they haven't used since Protective Edge. The injuries are permanent. 5,100. 40 have been killed. How many Israelis have been injured? 0. How many have been killed? 0. Is that a question of disproportionate force? When you line up assassins along a fence and they're picking off kids, what relevance does this category of disproportionate force have? It's the targeting of civilians. These are daily crimes against humanity. I can't even understand the mindset of these idiotic human rights organizations and everybody else who keeps invoking this utterly hollow, meaningless, pointless term about disproportionate force. For force to be disproportionate, there has to be a military target. When you shoot a kid who's running away, is that disproportionate force? When you shoot a kid who's praying on the ground, is that disproportionate force? Where is the military target? It's like this complete mindlessness when you talk about the people of Gaza. To use this antiseptic legalese, which idiotic, moronic human rights specialists and lawyers spend days and days debating which body of international law should we be using in this particular situation. Well, you moron, you shouldn't be using anybody. You should use your head instead of your idiotic bodies of law. What right can anyone have to poison kids? Doesn't make sense to me. So I think, with all due respect, and I do respect you, and that's a fact, I think the question is irrelevant. And in any other context, people would be bewildered that these sorts of debates go on.